Aloha kako and talofa. My name is Yaneta Le'i from Wailua, Hawaii, and I'm part of the Sundance Institute Indigenous Program. For over 40 years, Utah has been home to the Sundance Film Festival, and I'd like to acknowledge the Ute tribal nation, the ancestral keepers of the land that Sundance calls home. I would also like to honor the indigenous lands and people from which you join us, from our cold weather cousins in Sampmi lands to the Kanaka Maoli banded together atop Mauna Kea, Hawaii. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy our reimagined 2021 Sundance Film Festival.
Hi, I'm John Nine. I'm one of the senior programmers at Sundance, and I'd like to welcome you to this virtual component of the festival and to Cinema Cafe, which is part of our talks and events program. You're going to find a lot of incredible conversation events at the festival this year, and many more in the Festival Village area. And you can find information about all those events in the program guide on the festival website. Cinema Cafe is presented by Audible, and I want to thank them for their support. And I just want to say a few words about today's guests, both of whom have work in this year's program. Shaka King is a festival alum. His feature directing debut, Newlyweeds, played here in 2013, and his short film, The Mullinians, played 2 years later. And he's directed work for Hulu's Shrill, HBO's Random Acts of Flyness, and High Maintenance. And the film that he has here in the 2021 festival is Judas and the Black Messiah, which is about Fred Hampton, the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, and its infiltration by FBI informant William O'Neill, which will be released by Warner Brothers in a few weeks. Ahmir Questlove Thompson is many things. He's a drummer, a producer, a DJ, a culinary entrepreneur, best-selling author, co-founder of The Roots, and he's a filmmaker. He's here at this year's Sundance with his debut feature film, which is called Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised, about the Harlem Cultural Festival, which took place in the summer of 1969, but remained kind of an untold story for many years until now. And we're grateful to have moderating the conversation Hannah Giorgis, who is a staff writer at The Atlantic, where she covers culture. Her writing appears in a host of other publications, including the New York Times Magazine, The New Yorker, The Fader, Bon Appetit, Pitchfork, and the Addis Ababa Noir Anthology. So I want to thank all of today's guests and turn this over to Hannah.
Thanks for talking with me today, y'all. It was a real delight to watch both of your films. I'm so excited for folks to get into it. I sort of would love to just take a step back for a moment and just ask both of you, and maybe we can start with you, Shaka, where does the story of this film start for you? When was the moment that you sort of knew this was something you had to do and you wanted to be part of?
Pretty much immediately when it was brought to me by the Lucas brothers. They basically came to me and said, I knew who Fred Hampton was. I didn't know who William O'Neill was. And when they told me, I said, that's
Right.
fascinating. They said, we kind of envision this as sort of, The Departed, but in the world of COINTELPRO. And I just immediately saw a movie. And from that moment on, I just kind of became obsessed with kind of seeing it through.
Yeah. And yourself, Questlove?
This film was brought to me, I believe, in late 2017. And at the time, the two producers, David Dinnerstein and Robert Foivelant, basically just started the pitch with the most, at the time, just seemed preposterous because I thought I was the all-knowing kind of sage of everything music. And they're like, yeah, this festival happened in Harlem with Stevie Wonder, Sly and the Family Stone, Nina Simone, B.B. King, Mahalia Jackson, Moms Mabley's, Last Night and the Pip Staple Singers, like all these acts. And then it was like, I'd never heard of this. And then they told me that the footage has sat in the basement for 50 years, never seen by the public. And then at that point, it was sort of like, I was like, well, why are you coming to me? Like besides a common video, I have no experience in this medium. And and like when you want a real director to do this, like that's how I felt. I just felt like, well, sure, like your ego will make you want to do this, but this is like a historical first. Like, why would you guys trust me behind this 18 wheeler where I just got my permit like last week, like that sort of thing. But then on the other side of it, I am the guy that sits in the theater, always telling my date like, okay, that never happened, or this music cue is wrong, or like I'm the snob that real film directors like, they hate because I'll be like, that didn't happen. That was 1962. Instead of. So they wore me down, and then by 8 months later, I knew this film was my destiny because once I saw the footage, I just lit up like, okay, I have to tell this story. So that's where it starts with me.
That footage is also pristine. It's kind of crazy. I got the link.
Yeah.
They sent me a faulty link earlier, but I was able to watch an hour of it before this conversation. And it was crazy because my uncle, who's the co-composer on my movie, lives across the street from Mount Morris Park West, and I essentially grew up in that park. I know that park super intimately.
Really?
So, and he's like played tons of, and he, another crazy thing is that his name's Craig Harris. He took me to my first Root show, which is kind of nuts because he played with you guys in New York all the time. He was friends with your manager, Rich.
Didgeridoo.
He was the guy. He was the dude with the trombone and the didgeridoo. With the bald head.
That's your
my uncle. He co-composed this movie, my movie. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yo.
It's crazy. So I'm like looking at that footage, and I'm like, yo, this is across the street from Craig's house, and I never knew this happened ever. Like, this, it was just nuts to me watching it. Just crazy.
You and me both. Wait, can I ask one question? You mentioned the Lucas brothers. You mean those Lucas brothers, or is there another set of Lucas brothers?
Yeah. No, those Lucas brothers. Yeah.
Only because I know them so well. I was like, wait a minute. He has to be like, because again, I just watched your movie and I was like, wait a minute. Can't be that Lucas brothers. Maybe like George Lucas has like a set of him and Melanie have like a set of like nephews adopted somewhere. Yo, that's impressive. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. They're sharp. They're very, very intelligent cats. I mean, they like graduated from law school. They were both about to be like, deep in criminal justice, and then one of them discovered comedy, and they're twins. So the other one was like, I guess we're doing comedy.
Wow.
But they're like really, really, really sharp cats. So.
It's amazing.
That's wild. Questlove, tell me a little more about working with that sort of archival footage. Like what did it feel like to be dealing with that? How did you sort of know what contemporary interviews you wanted to add into the mix? What was your process like on that?
Well, there were so many things I went through. I'll say that initially I went through the gate. I think everyone that does a documentary, of course, has their agenda at hand. You sit there in front of your vision board and, you're trying to figure out what your storyline is going to be and what sub stories you're going to tell. And, it looks like one of those CSI episodes with the yarn and the string like everywhere. And then you do your first interview. And again, all it takes is just like one line or one factoid that you have to investigate. And then that becomes a rabbit hole. And you do about 10 or 15 of these. And the next thing you know, you now have to chop and burn down your entire premise in your house because now you have this other valuable information.
Right.
So I will say that, it was a weird, it was a great problem to have because, coming in the gate, I was like, well, I have all this footage and no witnesses because either a lot of people passed away since 1969 that were of age to remember, or everyone was under the age of 11 and they barely remember. There's a few people that are like 80 years old right now that have some memory. So, I went from having a very specific story to tell, and then I wound up with an embarrassment of riches and too much story to tell. So, my first cut was like 3 hours and 40 minutes. So that wasn't good.
Well, it's impressive that you put it down from there. That's a lot. I mean, I would have loved to see sort of more of the footage. Like, there's so much, sort of vibrance and richness there. I can see how that would have been a serious difficulty. So congrats on that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Shaka, can you tell us a little bit about what your research process was like? What your sort of deep dive into the chairman's life was like? What did you do? Just to pull all of that information together.
Started with just some books that Luke's brothers recommended. They'd done their share research, and then went through the bibliographies of those books, and stumbled upon some more. Studied history of Chicago during that time. I had a co-writer, Will Burson, who'd done some research on his own because he'd been working on his own Fred Hampton biopic at one point. And he had a ton of resources, and we just started sharing stuff and finding stuff. I mean, FBI, files, but the ultimate research we did was just oral history. We were fortunate enough to, basically work with Fred Hampton, Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. and Akua Njeri. Fred Hampton's, would have been widow. We had them as cultural consultants on the film, and we'd been in dialogue with Fred Hampton Jr. for about a year and a half prior to even rolling. And then I'd also been introduced to some former Illinois chapter members, Lynn French, Joan McCarty, and they introduced me to some other folks, Blair Anderson, who was actually present during the assassination and was personally wounded as a result. And so that oral history was ultimately like super informative because, it's known now that the FBI essentially wrote the history on the Panthers. I think 70% of the articles that were published in the 60s and 70s about the Panthers were essentially directly written by FBI agents or folks who were paid off by the FBI. And even a lot of, academic texts, don't, especially when you're talking about the Illinois chapter, they have a lot of misinformation in them, and not even necessarily intentionally. I mean, a lot of it is because, after the events depicted in the film, they were very mistrustful of outsiders. And so they're not really particularly open to talking with people and sharing this information. And so we were really, really fortunate that they chose to share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just sort of comes through really clearly that there's so much depth there. One of the things I've been thinking about is that both of these films sort of really zero in on the year 1969 in particular and the social environment of that pivotal year. I think there's a line in Summer of Soul about 69 was the year where the Negro died and Black was born. And I'd love to hear from you, Questlove, about what that change symbolized and sort of how you wanted to capture that and what you wanted to bring with regard to that on screen.
Well, this particular festival, the Harlem Cultural Festival, it was a high point during a really low time. It was a statement of independence and of freedom, and of unity at a time when, there was divisiveness. Divisiveness was like an institutionalized tool. And at that, it's a coming of age story because you have what was 10 years before, which is essentially like 10 to 15 years before, which is like the beginning and the seeds of the civil rights movement. Their method of expression which is more like be seen and not heard, be quiet, docile, very meek. And then you just have a new generation. The rising of the Black Panthers and a very direct way of wanting results, not now but right now. There's actually a line in Shaka's film where the FBI is sort of saying like equality is going to take some time to to get to. Like we're not ready for that yet. Whereas it was very plain and abundant and evident that that the time was now. So you're probably the greatest example of how that was really demonstrated was the arrival of Sly and the Family Stone. Of course, in hindsight, Sly is at the he's one of the Mount Rushmore of music and funk music, or just music period, top of the pantheon. But I saw something in the footage that really troubled me. Now it's 1969, which is basically like Sly's breakthrough year, and at that, this particular performance is a kind of a dress rehearsal, if you will, for Woodstock. Woodstock, his performance there was like definitely the legendary highlights that turned him into a household name. He took advantage of that moment. And this is 2 weeks before, so I noticed that when Sly was announced and I looked on one of our audience cameras to see the crowd reaction, instantly I was like, oh, okay, I get it. This would be like this would be like a Wu-Tang concert back in 2014, and someone announces like, "Oh, we have a special guest. Migos is here." And I noticed that all the younger, anyone that seemed to be like under the age of 21, were like going out their mind, like "Slide the Family Stone," and anyone that was, kind of my age and older, like 40 and up, just looked at them like they were aliens. And I didn't get it. I was like, wait a minute, like everyday people, you can make it if you try, like dancing to music, like this is Sly and the Family Stone. And I realized that, I take it for granted now, but it was just unheard of for Black musicians to perform in their street clothes. Like, wait, they don't have tuxedos on. What is this? Like a Black band with a white drummer, and why are a girl playing, why is she playing a trumpet? Yeah. And why, like, it was just so radical at the time. So, and I know that look of conservative, like, oh, you heathen, you. So, just based on that Sly and the Family Stone performance, which is what I watched first, like when we unearthed all of these footage, and I was shocked. I was like, wow, this is a struggle for them. This is going to take a while for the audience to warm up to this idea. So that's when I realized, like, one, how crucial Sly and the Family Stone was in representing the rebellious ideas of a younger generation, Black Panthers and younger, and kind of not only rebelling against the government society, but just like conservative Black people. So that sort of mixture is there in this film a lot. So I thought that was very interesting.
It's kind of crazy how like when we reflect on the 60s, we assume that everyone was radical. Whereas, even within the younger population, there were many conservative young people during that time. So yeah, it's just something I thought of when you said, what you just said, Quest.
Well, even at that, I've realized that that was another takeaway. I didn't realize how conservative Black people were. I think growing up, I just thought like, oh, my aunts are just Christians, and they're humble, spiritual people. But and then to get to the place where we're now editing and creating this film in the age of quarantining and COVID, and I saw like how parallel, how much has not changed in 50 years, and the circumstances that brought on that concert 50 years ago is now affecting us in 2020 still. Yeah, that irony wasn't lost on me as well. So it was almost like watching in real time.
But then I also think about how, like, just even to bring it back to your, question, Hannah, about 68, 69, the assassination of Martin Luther King was a real game changer, I think, for a lot of young conservative Black people. That radicalized a lot of folks. I remember reading or watching, I think I was watching a documentary where Bobby Seale talked about how many Panther chapters popped up around the nation after the assassination of Martin Luther King. I mean, the Illinois chapter started after the assassination of Martin Luther King. And, Fred Hampton was a NAACP youth leader. And I think his politics, they were already, I think, shifting prior to the assassination, but certainly I think that had a tremendous effect on him, which is, that's why we start the movie the way we start the movie, because that's a real shift. And along the same lines, I think, COVID has done that for, I think, a large segment of the young population as well. I think an event is powerful. You know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes an event can really, I think, just like snap the masses and capture the masses' attention in such a way where it just like really, really shifts the culture in a big way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that's been interesting to watch in the last 6-7 months or so is the way that there's a sudden realization, I think in certain artistic spaces, that Black art is valuable and like things that we should be discussing and promoting and sort of talking about, not just in February, but around perhaps year round. I think, one of the things for me that I've thought about though is it's so often that means that Black art is discussed in terms of being, urgent or timely or relevant or all these sorts of words that are not actually about the work, but that are about a specific audience's reaction to it. And so I'm wondering, sort of for both of you, how did you maintain your vision despite, whatever potential external pressures might exist?
The fact that, like, of all the questions that I had about the film, the burning question that was underneath it all was just the idea of Black erasure, and I couldn't get out of my mind. And the thing is, when we found the footage and we found the contracts and the stage plotting and all the things that go with this festival, the amount of rejection letters of "we'll pass on this" was just staggering to me. And at first I thought, well, okay, although all these acts are they're household names, they were still just one step before being household names. Then, like, it was almost like I was making excuses for them. Like, okay, well, Superstition was 3 years from now. So, he's not Stevie Wonder yet, but yet, by that point he had already had, 11 top 10 hits.
Yeah.
And it was just burning me inside that, why is it taking 50 years for someone to say, like, this is worthy to step up to the platform. Which is, for me, I just, it dismays me that we had to come like this close to extinction in the past year to get to this level of understanding and openness and, okay, now we'll listen to you. You know, it's baffling me. I mean, I'm grateful to be here to tell the story. I'm grateful to, to open up this festival. But, I hope that it doesn't take apocalyptic events and bloodshed for people to finally believe us. Like, we've been trapped in this little boy that cried wolf kind of cycle for centuries. And, it's like now it's like finally we get to tell our truth and tell our stories, like our stories matter. Yeah, that's the irony isn't lost on me that not only were the circumstances 50 years ago happening right now, but just the fact that it took so long for it to happen. Technically I should have grown up watching this and, it could have informed me. But
it's kind of crazy how to hear that from you about this footage, right? And just to think about, my experience since coming to Sundance for the first time, 2013, that was that was my first feature. And that was, kind of the beginning of my professional career. I mean, I left the festival basically having given the movie away for nothing to a terrible distributor. And then I didn't really get any work out of the festival, until I went back later in the short. So it's like, I had to, just as a Black artist, I feel like I've had to measure my success by a different metric for my own sanity and happiness. And it's great because it's gotten me to a place psychologically where, I don't need white people to care about what I do. I haven't needed white people to care about what I do in years now, but what's corny is that I need money to make stuff. So that's why I think we're talking about this and it's like, yeah, okay, finally, studios are willing to cough up dollars because we took this movie around, 2 years ago to the studios, and the only studio, and this is after, Ryan Coogler, my producer, and, one of the biggest directors in the world was coming off of a massive hit. And we had him attached as a producer, Charles King attached as a producer, willing to put up half the budget, with Keith Stanfield attached, Daniel Kaluuya attached. I'm thinking we walk in this and it's a bidding war situation. And, they all of the studios that we pitched to, minus Warner Brothers, just really came in like really lowballed us in terms of what they were willing to give us to make a movie like this, because they thought that it wasn't worth enough. They thought it wouldn't do well enough and make enough money based upon the algorithms that they came up with that are totally ridiculous. So, just to hear what you said, Questlove, it's like, our shit's been disposable that long of them. You know what I'm saying? Even after it's proved massively successful time and time and time again. When you hear that, you're just like, capitalism, racism, I don't know which, I thought y'all like making money, it's like really, it's a disease. It's like a real mental illness.
I'm realizing that I don't want to keep folks from actually seeing clips of your film, so I'd love to make sure that we get both of those going. If we could have Summer of Soul, and then if we could do Judas and the Black Messiah right after that, I'd love to have that now.
We want Sister Mahalia, Mavis Staples, and all of our groups together to prepare to do as our prayer today, Precious Lord.
Precious Lord, Take My Hand was Dr. King's favorite song. And Sister Mahalia Jackson was my idol. She was my hero. I loved her so much. This day I sit right next to her And when came time for her to sing, she leaned over and told me, baby, Haley don't feel too good today. I need you to help me sing this song. And I said, yes, ma'am, I'll help you.
It's not a question of violence or non-violence. It's a question of resistance to fascism or non-existence within fascism. You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom. I said, hey, I'm revolutionary. Hey, I'm revolutionary. Hey, I'm revolutionary. Hey, I'm revolutionary. Let me hear the people beat. Let me hear the people beat.
Man.
Wow. Right. Give it a second, just like, all right.
Wait, can I just ask one question? I know the journalist in me is trying to just be the subject and not nerd out.
Yeah, I feel it. It's okay. It's fine.
How did you pull that performance out of Daniel? Like, multiple takes or whatever? Like,
we did many. You know, we did maybe. I mean, he lost his. He had to do so much work to not lose his voice that day. It's really he did so much preparation. I mean, you know, he's talked about like how he had to take opera classes to prepare for two specific speeches he gives in particular in the movie. But I mean, you know, the thing is that day he came in. It was nuts. He'd been doing Queen and Slim Press for a week. He hadn't played Fred for a week, right? And he came back like right off a flight. He woke up late that morning. He'd never woken up late before for you know. He showed up and I mean, first take, he came in there and it's not just him, it's the audience. The audience took him to a place that day in the space. Everything that day was real. Everything that day was real. So he came in and he was treated like he was Fred Hampton coming home from prison. That's how we were treating him. That's how he walked in and people like that was the energy. So he fed off of the crowd in such a way where he doesn't remember a lot of that day. When he talked to him, he was really everybody that specific day, like everything kind of came together in such an incredibly specific way to just create a true reality in front of the camera that day.
Man, he was in the zone. Yeah. Hats off, man.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He was.
How did you go about bringing folks together like that, building that kind of trust? Because that's something that jumps out at me as I watch, is that so much of this is so, you know, to the extent that movement building is about building trust, like pulling together a film like this, it captures that, sort of requires the same thing. What did that look like? What was your process there?
You know, I mean, it was easy to trust my collaborators because, well, actually, I think it was easy to trust everybody on all sides because I think everyone's intentions were so very clear from early on. And I kind of intuitively knew that everyone was like where they needed to be. Like every single, you know, cast member and crew member was, you know, in the space that they needed to be. They'd been hired for a reason. And so, and I think everyone kind of felt the same way, so that, you know, we didn't have to do a lot of work to trust. I mean, some folks showed up, you know, Jesse showed up. We hadn't worked together before. He showed up 2 weeks in the shooting and like, okay, you're shooting the next day. The same thing with Dominique. You know, she and I had been talking for a year and really, you know, I mean, she helped shape that character with me in so many ways. And I think that plays a big part too. Like you know, there's a lot of filmmakers I love, but like my sort of the artist who really has influenced me the most is Miles Davis, because Miles Davis was the best at identifying who was perfect for what role. And he knew that this process was so much greater than him, and all he needed to do was stay out of the way and play his position. I think, if you kind of like cast properly when you're doing something that's as collaborative as filmmaking, and by cast, I don't just mean the performers, I mean the people behind the camera as well. If you do that properly, then really all you're doing at that point is, like you have your vision of the movie as the writer director, but everyone else has their vision of the movie, and if you get the right people, their vision is just as interesting as yours. And so as the director, you just cherry pick the best of everyone's interpretation of what you're presenting to them, and then shape it and mold it into something better than what you could have envisioned. So it's like, I just, if you do it right, if you do it right and you like prepare everyone prior and like you get everybody just like in a great creative space, you're really just getting gifts, and then it's just taste. Like, do you have taste, and that's it,
Yeah. Were there things you were nervous about?
I mean, it's really crazy because I remember before, I remember very, very early when it felt like it was going to really happen, feeling a sense of, okay, now you got to really do it, But I honestly felt so supported with my team. Like everybody was so perfect, was just like, I really felt so supported, honestly, that it just felt, I've had many, 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 pieces of evidence that this was like supposed to happen when it happened. There were a lot of Fred Hampton movies that, were developed by a lot of great filmmakers, Forrest Whitaker, Antoine Fuqua, great filmmakers, and they'd get close, or they'd get however close, and it just wouldn't happen for multiple reasons. Sometimes it was the money, sometimes the family was like, we can't go forward with that. And so, it happens when it's supposed to happen. Like the movie coming out when it's coming out, I'm just like, I guess that's why it got made now. And I'm just glad that, Spirit and the universe was like, Shak, that's stepping right here. Like just, catch the pass and then move the ball along to the next person. So,
Yeah, to be its steward, absolutely. I mean, the Miles Davis question is, or that note is great to me. I was sitting here thinking earlier about what films and what directors and what artists in general kind of shaped y'all's work in general. So it's lovely to hear that, and hearing that now and thinking about the movie, I can see the sort of not just the intentionality, but the level of like style that comes through. And I don't mean that in the superficial sense, but I mean that in the, in the Nikki Giovanni, like style has profound meaning sense. Right. And, Questlove, I would love to hear from you about what sorts of music or films or directors, what kind of came into your influences as you were thinking about what this might look like.
Yeah, well, I'll say that, because I come from an institution that has spent at least for 20 years, like 200, I'll round it off and say 220 to 250 days on a tour bus. So to live on a tour bus for 200 plus days out the year for 19 years, like between 1993 the way that I've passed the time was, I literally put myself through film school. And this is before I had a desire I don't even know I had the desire to make a film, but I did know that there's parallels in other creative forms, which is why I obsessed with the engine. So, I watch comedians, I watch culinary artists, and I watch directors and writers. So yeah, I've lived with many a Criterion Collection, many a director's commentary, just watching, I love documentaries. So there's no documentary that has gone unturned. I'll say specifically at the time when I got this, Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace had just got released,
Mhm.
Jackson Pollock's film. And because I knew so much of the backstory of it, um, I was really interested on how they decided to cut the film without any commentary whatsoever. Like you're just a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
And I was curious, but also, the fan in me was itching to know the history and the backstory of such a thing. So
Yeah.
I don't know. At the end of the day, I let the story tell itself. This story, it was impossible to drop the ball. That yes, even Questlove could direct this film, and it turned out quite great. So
Well, no, that's not fair to you. I was actually going to ask earlier that there was one of the moments that stood out to me was when I believe it's Sheila E. is talking about the importance of the festival and the ways in which it showed Blackness connecting across borders, right? And she says something to the effect of, "We were all speaking the same language, the drum." And there's
yeah,
a specificity and a clarity with which she speaks about the literal artistry and the literal work of drumming
right.
that was really interesting to me, and that I don't think necessarily would have come through if somebody didn't have specific attention to that. So I'm curious about how you thought about explaining or kind of conveying like sonic ties across the African diaspora.
Well, I definitely, I had two sets of questions, and of course, the prime questions were just the general basics of what was needed to serve the film. But then I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for Easter eggs. Again, and watching many directors' commentary and outtakes, I'm a guy that loves Easter eggs, either hidden tracks or whatever. So I mean, there were just general things that I wanted to know, obsessing with the engine. So when Sheila E's talking about Mongo Sam Maria's hands being numb from destroying them from all the years of playing and how they're like clubs, um, that to me is like a eureka moment. To anyone else, that could be a boring moment, like, well, I don't know if that's necessarily. So I will say that my producer Joseph Patel um, was really key in letting me know, like, okay, maybe we should leave this part on a lot of great things that I thought were great were left on the editing floor. But, like I wanted to know what the writer was into. Like, what did Stevie Wonder have backstage, like for snacks? Like were writers a thing back in 1969 backstage? And, like I'm the guy that wants to know every nook and cranny and detail. So I just did the fine balance between serving the story and making sure that you had hidden appetizers as well, like sneak you a treat every now and then.
That fifth
Yeah.
dimension, like I said, I only saw the first hour, but that fifth dimension, reveal, just was
Yeah.
like, I didn't realize that, that they gotten that's how the hair soundtrack came into their lap. It was just like, wait, what? That's
Oh,
insane.
dude, they wanted me to drop the wallet story, and I'm like, guys, you don't even know, like, to lose your wallet and get a Grammy for, like,
No.
yeah, there were certain moments where I had to beg them, like, please keep this in, don't put this on the cutting room floor. So, yeah, that the wallet, the fifth dimension. I'm so glad you validated me right now. You can do no wrong. Thank you. Now I feel
Shaka,
validated.
did you have moments like that? Did you have your things you had to fight for like that?
Oh yeah, I mean, you fight for. I mean, we had plenty of fights I won, plenty of fights I lost, and a lot of the ones I lost, I'm glad I lost because the people I was fighting against were totally right. You know, but yeah, I got a million. You know what I'm saying? A million. But at the end of the day, like it's a collaborative. Like people talk about filmmaking as a collaborative experience with actors and your crew. But it's also a collaborative experience with your producers in the studio, when you're making a studio film. And, sometimes, I mean, we're all familiar with the horror stories of how those collaborative experiences go south. But like sometimes they're incredibly, incredibly beneficial, because what studios do know how to do for the most part is make a commercial property. And, you know, commercial property is just, you know, it's many things, but among them, it's something that a lot of people have seen. And we wanted a lot of people to see this movie, and not because, you know, for no other reason than, you know, this is history that has been intentionally kept from us. And, you know, I think there's just a lot of things you can extrapolate from a film like this. And so the studio was incredibly like valuable in terms of, you know, how do we make the almost like for me, it was like, how do I make like Battle of Algiers, but a pop album? You know what I'm saying? It's like, and that was it, you know?
Yeah.
And they helped with
Great reference.
that. They were tremendously helpful in that,
Right.
you know?
All right. That's great. You know, I want to be mindful of time and the fact that we're kind of winding down here. But thank you so much for that, and to both of you really for just, you know, helping to bring some of that history to light, and to make sure that more folks are seeing it now.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice
Pleasure.
talking to you, Quest.
Thank you for having me.